Hello, dear friends of the gallery. We are standing in the middle of an installation by Martin Gerwers that he has realized for our third solo exhibition, Ascending, Descending. What you see is two groups of three pending wooden zigzag structures which bear the title Steps. They have been installed in a way that we as viewers are still able to move through and around them. They are, on the other side, hanging close enough to create a sort of dialogue between us, the viewers, and the structures. Seeing the loosely spread structures, one could even think of people engaged in conversations in groups, as if it were a lively exchange of ideas during an opening of a show. You might have realized that I am not describing the steps as sculptures, but rather structures, because sculptures are, by classic definition, objects created either by removing or shaping material. They have something obviously three-dimensional about them. And even if we know that these classic ideas are not as relevant any longer as they were, if you think of sculptures by, for instance, Marc di Suvero or Anthony Caro, it still seems more adequate to describe these steps either as structures or as markings in space. The steps are located in the space like lines and surfaces, depending on the angle of view. Basically, these works, which on the one hand have a very high aesthetic that is a spatially perceptible or perceived presence, but on the other hand are not actual spatial bodies, can almost be compared to the mathematical concept of lines and surfaces. While the line is an abstract coherent, one-dimensional geometric structure without transverse extension, the surface is a two-dimensional subset of three-dimensional space. Such an extreme reduction of what we have described in previous exhibitions by Martin Gerwers as painting in space is something we have not yet seen from Gerwers. For instance, the pylons that he has shown in our gallery or in the Leopold Hösch Museum in Düren, or most recently, truly monumental and spectacular, in St. Peter's in Cologne, can also be experienced, again depending on the angle of view, as colored surfaces in space. As soon as you move around them, however, it becomes clear that they are pyramidal bodies on a quadrangular or triangular ground plan. In contrast, when you walk around the steps, the surface is reduced to a zigzag line that does not actually appear to have any serious spatial physical extension. While I was giving the works by Anthony Caro and Marc di Suvero as examples for sculptures that are not particularly bulky objects, but objects that can also be described as structures, I was not relating Gerwers' steps to these artists. I do permit myself, however, to inscribe these steps in art history by mentioning that their perception in motion can be compared to the experience we have when we see larger examples of Sol-Lewitt's cube structures. Here, the vertical elements also enter into intensive optical relationships with each other and make perspectives and overlaps tangible. And of course, we can also think of Fred Sandberg's sculptures, which use threads alone to create structures and empty, airy bodies in space. This negative space, which is also drawn by Gerwers' steps, loads the whole exhibition space with energy. And I want to also mention Constantin Brancusi and his endless columns that can be associated. Here, as in Gerwers' case, we have the theoretical possibility of a structure reaching endlessly high into the sky, and thus connecting our sphere with a rather conceptual space. And this again is bringing me back to the mathematical idea of the lines and the surface that I mentioned earlier. With the artworks, we do have objects that have their reality and do exist. They are, however, referring to the mathematical concepts, or, will Martin Gerwers like to hear that? I don't know. Maybe even religious ideation. One aspect of the steps has not been mentioned yet: their uselessness in the sense of tool to go up or down. It is obvious that we cannot walk these steps, and this is, again, comparable to Brancusi. What is not obvious, however, is what inspired Gerwers to do the steps. He had read and thought of a text by Samuel Beckett, The Lost Ones. Beckett describes a group of people who are trapped without orientation and uselessly in a labyrinthine space structured by stairs, ascents and descents, who can neither escape nor do anything meaningful with their situation. Although the paths provided by the stairs do exist, They only have the character of a reference. And now we come back to Gerwers, and no actual function, but only an experience of aesthetic perception. In Ascending Descending, we are also showing 4 two-part paintings in oil and acrylic on wood, as well as, and this is a first, 7 works on and made of paper. All these works have in common that they show in their upper parts a pylon with its tip pointing down, and in their lower halves a pylon with its tip pointing up. It is obvious that these painted pylons remind us of the above-mentioned pylons in rooms, be it St. Peter in Cologne, or be it the Leopold Hösch Museum in Düren, or our gallery. In each case, we had hanging and standing pylons, and the painted pylons of our exhibits are referring to the pylons as objects. But rather than being signs for these objects in the real space, the paintings are showing what, in part, the objects are about, the composition of colors. So, while the objects force us to move around them in order to entirely experience them, they can also be seen as color compositions, as if they were paintings that can be seen and understood from one point of view. In most of the two-dimensional works, the tips meet. Only one work of paper shows tips that are set apart. In any case, the tips can always be read as vanishing points in an imaginary space, and the horizontal edges of the picture planes, which abut each other, as horizons of an abstract landscape. But the supposedly visible landscape is transferred into a different, more abstract state by the subtle and highly sensitive color compositions that Gerwers has created and applied to his geometric forms. In the same way, the geometries that define the picture surfaces disintegrate into worlds of color in which it is difficult to focus on the mathematically describable forms. And here again, an art historical reference is obvious. While Josef Albers called his most famous and large group of works Homage to the Square, it was rather an homage to the color compositions he had chosen than an homage to the geometrical forms painted with the chosen colors. Most probably, he had chosen the square as an ideal, or if you want, non-relational form. I am convinced that Walter Benjamin's famous thesis about the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction in the end is wrong. His intentions to democratize art and negate its commodity fetish character were certainly very good. However, the larger part of artworks need to be experienced in the flesh. And this is in particular true for Martin Gerwers' works that have a sensibility and spatial presence that seeing images of them is certainly not sufficient to fully experience their qualities. The show is running through October 26, 2024, and we would be very happy to see you in the gallery. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.